It is Monday morning. As you guys can see, I'm finally getting a chance to sit down and actually do the sit down video I have been promising y'all for some time now. I did just get off work this morning, so please bear with me in this video. I'm going to try to be as detailed as I can because I know with this video, I try to do every sit down video that I do as detailed as possible so you guys can follow along and actually use the strategies that I actually give you guys to help study for like your respiratory classes and anything of that sort with that. So I am going to go off of a few questions that I did get on Instagram and some of the comments on previous videos that I did earlier in my program and try to answer them in this video. As you guys can see, the title of this video, it is about the TMC board exam for respiratory students that are either in their last year of the program where they actually started taking their classes on studying for boards. And I'm just going to basically just tell you guys what I did and what helped me to study for my TMC and how I passed it on the first try. And this is going to be a part one. The clinical sims is not going to be a very long sit down video, so I may be able to squeeze it in here. But with the TMC, I feel like it took a good little process, but it's not very much that I used differently from the package that we got in our Kettering class. So I'm just going to go ahead and just tell you guys what helped me, and hopefully this will help you guys if you're using Kettering yourselves, because I do know that there are like several different things that people are using now, and I know Lindsey Jones and Kettering are like the top two most common systems that the different schools are using. But for us, we just used Kettering, and we did use an adjunct, which was Gary Pearson, but I didn't find Gary Pearson to be helpful for me, so I just didn't use it at all. So I'm just going to give you guys what I used, which was just strictly sticking with the with Kettering. So I got all my books and stuff. I got my laptop here just in case if I have to pull up anything. But right now, I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. So with what I used to study for the TMC, I used what we had in our packages that came with like 3 things. Well, it came with quite a bit, but we got all 3 of these books right here. One of them, of course, is the lecture notes to help practice for the clinical sims. And then we had the main book for the TMC, which is the study guide, which is what I used. And then they had a workbook that came with it too if you wanted to use it for practice when studying the sections in here. Now, for the TMC, what I did is, of course, on the actual Kettering site, it does give you a full detail of notes, lecture notes, and some of them are at least 2 hours and some change long, but they are very good lecture notes. Well, not lecture notes, but they're really good audio notes that you can take in this book and study all together when you want to take a break from the audio. Because with me traveling back and forth from my apartment in Georgia here in Alabama to my work, I would listen to that audio all the way from from Georgia to Alabama, and my ride was at least close to 4 hours, so I could at least listen to at least 2 audios or 1 audio twice by the time I reached my destination where I was going to, which was primarily either at my parents' house where I'm at now or to my job. But long story short, what I normally did is when we first got our book in the actual Kettering class, of course it was kind of hard to adjust because with these tactics that they want you to use when you're studying the Kettering way, is totally different from how you're being taught throughout your program. And I don't want you guys to get discouraged when you do start looking through this material and it's totally different, but some similarities of what you guys learned in your program, because it's not so much of you're not going to use the information that your teacher gave you throughout your entire years of being in the program, and the information they provided isn't wrong. What it is Kettering has its own way of teaching you the way that the NBRC wants you to know how they want you to take the test, because this is mainly what Kettering is doing, is teaching you how to take the test and also telling you what the NBRC expects when it comes to certain patients that you would get in these scenarios. So it's very important that you don't get frustrated, and it is going to cause you to get a little upset in the beginning because you're starting a whole new system that's teaching you a different way, different ranges, some the same, some different, but you don't want to get discouraged, because this is going to help you take your board exam. And then once you pass these exams and you start on a job, you're going to learn solely how that job works, how they do things, their policies, everything. So you're going to learn a whole different way and still be able to exercise what you've learned in Kettering and your classes. But just for the moment of studying for the NBRC, you're going to learn the way Kettering wants you to learn, so that way you can go into the NBRC with an open mind of, okay, this is what Kettering said do, this is how I need to attack it. Like if you're already working as a student, do not combine what you've learned as a student, as an intern at your job, with Kettering. Because with the NBRC, like the guy on the audio said, the NBRC is like the perfect hospital. They have certain ways that they want you to do things. They don't have the updated equipment that we have today. They have like the old school equipment. They use equipment that we would see in our textbooks that we don't use anymore. So you have to look at Kettering in a different way, because they're wanting you to go in a different direction when it comes to studying for the NBRC, and you want to be quick with it too, because you only get a certain amount of time to take your test. But back to what I did. What I did was, like I said, I listened to the audio numerous times, whether I was cooking, cleaning, whatever I was doing, I was listening to the audio. Sometimes with certain sections, I would listen to it multiple times, because with me, I'm more of a hands-on, but at the same time, I'm visual too. So when I read something, like a question or something that I'm given, even if it's a practice question you see somewhere, you can actually see what you saw in your book, or the pictures that you were able to see, or the videos that you were able to see on YouTube or whatever, that gives you a visual of what they're talking about. So once you do that, then you'll be able to move and brush past it quickly without even hesitating on what you need to do. So with that being said, what I did was, again, like I said, I listened to the audios multiple times, and after, I want to say the second or third time of listening to the same audio, I would start to take notes in that section. For example, section A is like the biggest section out of the entire Kettering, that and mechanical ventilation. But with patient assessment, that's like the biggest, most important part, because you are going to gather so much information just by knowing everything there is to know about patient assessment. That is going to be the key thing on how you're going to move next, like what type of x-rays you're going to order, what type of tests you're going to run, if an ABG is appropriate. It's going to tell you so much about your patient within that time frame that you're gathering all that information when it comes to, learning and knowing what to ask, how to scale it from 1 to 10, how to notice if your patient is tripoding or seesaw breathing, all type of things that you're gonna know just by looking at your patient, assessing them, and even just basically looking at the signs and symptoms of previous diseases or processes that may be similar to what your patient is showing you right in front of you. And you're not going to get multiple choice answer choices that's going to help you narrow down what's going on. You're going to have to visually make that judgment when you go in your patient's room and basically make that call. So when you have to message a doctor, you want to be very straightforward and very, very clear on what you found and what you think and what you would recommend to treat this patient, even if it means transferring them off of one floor to another. But back to patient assessment, this is the longest section starting off. So I definitely spent a lot of time on this section when I did first start looking in this book. The audios on the Kettering website are at least almost 3 hours a piece. So you do have to make time and like seclude yourself in your room, apartment, whatever your living situation is, and make time to go through this book and actually study this patient assessment area, because it's very detailed and you cannot skip over this like you would anything else. So just moving forward, what I did was I took notes in this actual section, and I was able to listen to the audio numerous times and take notes. Like, I'm just going to show y'all, like, just an example. Like, I like to highlight a lot, so I highlighted certain areas that I needed to focus on, and I would just write notes on the side of what I learned in school to have a better understanding, or basically whatever he mentioned on the audio, because I felt like it was easier to do that, because he had a lot of things that were very important when it came to like studying this stuff. And one thing that I did make sure I wrote on several pages is that you'll never call the doctor. You'll never call the doctor in an MBRC world. You are it. You're everything. You're the doctor, the nurse, x-ray. You're all the positions in the hospital. You are it. So it's very important that you know every role in this book and how to read x-rays, what to recommend for it, everything, because you are going to be the person. He will say in the audio that the nurses are on standby, but 9 times out of 10, you are it, because doctors can start IVs, doctors can make recommendations, they can do anything as far as changing the frequency on an order, they can do everything. So 9 times out of 10, you're not even going to need the nurse unless you need to update them about a change that you made that they need to pass along and report. And you will get somewhat of a similar question like that. So I would definitely make sure that when you do go through everything in Kettering, that you understand what they're saying, how they're asking, and what he's trying to give you as a gem to actually get through the questions efficiently, so you don't waste all your time and fail the exam because you never finished answering the questions. Because I've had a few classmates that have failed because they did not finish the actual test. They ran out of time, and those questions are graded based on your response and the points that you'll get. So it's like you start off with a certain amount of points, and then as you go through the test, it starts to go down, because I'm not really sure if they changed the system on how they grade it, but just based on what they're doing, you have to be very on top of your game when it comes to answering these questions, because there's 2 right answers, but there's a good one and there's the one that is kind of almost good, but it wouldn't be your first choice. So like I showed y'all, I wrote on here, and if you guys want to, if you guys are doing Lindsey Jones, I'm not really sure how Lindsey's setup is because I didn't use it, but for Kettering, I would definitely make sure I made a note in there that you'll never call the doctor. You are at bedside. Nurses are on standby. You are it. You are it. So next things next, I wrote notes on this next page too. Like, I just wrote everything that I could find as extra information that was listed in the audio, on the paperwork that we got in class that correlated with what he talked about in the audio. So don't be afraid to write down notes on everything, because it's not going to make it seem like it's adding to what you're already having to study in the Kettering, but it's just simply giving you a better understanding of what you had already written down in your notes for class. That way you can have a better view of how they're wording it and what they're actually trying to say. So I always made sure I made notes and everything, and I pretty much did that throughout the entire book. I highlighted different highlighter colors just to have an understanding. If it was words in here that I did not understand, don't be afraid to not understand medical terms, because even doctors, they go through medical school, but there are some doctors that don't know what certain stuff means. So don't feel like because you see a word you don't understand, don't look at it as, oh, I'm not efficient enough to answer this question. It's just that you don't know what it means, but look it up. Look it up, because 9 times out of 10, they're probably going to use that term on the test. And I've seen maybe a couple of words that I've studied in Kettering on the test, and I was glad that I did the things that I did as far as looking up the term, writing the meaning next to it in a certain color. That way when I studied, I knew what it meant and what the word was. And sometimes seeing that word over and over again, you'll start to say like, oh, this is what this means. bilirubin, I already know that's bile, broken broken down red blood cells. I always get tongue tied on that. I don't know why, but that's what bilirubin is. So you already know that if you see a question of referring to bilirubin, you know that's going to be linked to jaundice. So we already know what jaundice is, basically a patient that has highlighter skin. And if you guys have not seen that, you will see it in the hospital, because a lot of people who have those issues, they are like bright yellow. They look exactly like a neon colored highlighter. So that's definitely something you would see on a daily basis. And that's tied to a person that's in liver failure, because I've had people who have drank themselves to death and their liver has started to fail, and then you could start to see their bilirubin labs look like crap, and then they start getting more yellower and yellower eyes. Everything is just yellow. So that's definitely something that you would see on the test as well. I mentioned I listened to the audio, I wrote notes in section A, and I also made sure that if I was to study inside of this book, I would study this book for the same amount of time that the audio was. So part 1 for section A, I would study and listen to that audio at least 2 times. So that's at least close to 5 hours worth of audio studying. But if you're doing stuff, I never just sat there and listened to it. If I was cooking, cleaning up or something like that, I would listen to the audio. So I definitely made sure I was doing something, because I've never actually went through this book along with the audio, because he's not going through every single thing on this audio. He's like not shortcutting it, but if he was to go through every single section of this Kettering book, you would never get through it, and the audio would be so long that it would be overwhelming just to get through the first part. But he goes through sections, the most important parts of the section. So it's very important that you do not try to follow this book with the audio, because you'll get frustrated, because I did, because I had to learn the hard way that these two do not correlate in a way, because he's jumping from section to section in patient assessment on the first half. So I would definitely make sure I have something to do. If you're riding somewhere to school and you got like an hour and some change to get there, I would listen to it then. If you are cleaning up, cooking, whatever, I would listen to it then. Something that you know you can be actively doing that doesn't kind of interfere with you listening to the audio and getting what you need from that. And I did a lot of that. And then what I did was, the amount of time that I listened to the audio, I would study this section. So I actually spent like 5 hours studying the first half of patient assessment after I listened to the audio. Now, I would not do it like right after I listened to the audio, but I would give myself some time to kind of like give myself a break, eat, sit down and kind of mentally charge myself, because sometimes I used to study straight forward for like maybe 6 to 7 hours, and it was a lot. So I had to learn to give myself breaks in between. So what I would do is, the first audio, when I listened to the first audio, the first 2.5 hours, I think it was, I gave myself a 30-minute break. And then once I got done, I would get a snack or something to drink, sit for a little bit, maybe scroll on social media at the most, and then I would go ahead and get back on it and listen to that audio again for those 2.5 hours. And after I got done, I would just, if I got done around maybe, let's say 2 o'clock, I would give myself a break from 2 to 4, and within those 2 hours, I would do any homework that I needed to complete for the program. I would do any type of reading that I needed to do to study for an actual test outside of Kettering, because we still had our other classes we were taking. So we had exams, classwork, and online evaluations we had to take for those classes. So it was always something to do in between that time. So I just spent those 2 hours getting my classwork done. And if I was able to get done in an hour, I would use that other hour to just eat lunch, chill, maybe rest, whatever. And then once I get to 4 o'clock, I would use the hour from 4 to 5 to meal prep, get my stuff ready for work, pack, wash clothes, anything I had to do to get ready for the weekend when I knew I had to travel or I had to do clinicals out of town that week. I would get all my prepping done around that time within the hour. And then once 6 o'clock came, got myself situated, took a shower, whatever I needed to do, and then from 7 to 9, I would study this book. I would study the first half. I would study it for 2 hours, and then depending on how I felt, if I wanted to do an extra hour, I would do an extra hour, and then I wouldn't be no later than maybe 12 o'clock going to bed if I knew I didn't have to wake up super early. So I definitely didn't overwhelm myself, but the latest I would stay up studying would be until 12 a.m. And that would at least make me feel like I studied efficiently and enough to where I was able to feel good about going to bed versus just not putting my all in something and going to bed knowing I could have did better. So I always try to make sure that if I do study, I study how I feel I need to and focus on the areas that I know I needed to focus on the most. So with section A, that pretty much was exercised the same for part 2 of section A. So that is something that I would definitely recommend for you guys doing. I know some people was telling me that they used some practice tests on the MBRC. We did do the practice MBRC for TMC on there when we were, I want to say a couple months before we actually took our first practice exit exam, which was an actual MBRC TMC exam. It had the full length. We had to take that in order to graduate, and we had 2 attempts on it. So with that, I made sure that whatever worked for me worked for me. I took the practice exam on the MBRC and I did not pass it, but she told me that she told us really, and this was kind of before we actually got hard into the book, but she just wanted us to take that practice exam to see where we were and to see what areas we need to study in and focus more on. So it wasn't so much to say like you're not going to do well on the test. It's just a guide to kind of show us like where we were in our studying and what we needed to focus on. I didn't pass it. I knew where my areas were, and that was mostly with troubleshooting, and I think it was more so troubleshooting and some things that I was mixing in with me being an intern at work with patient assessment on what we would do at my job, but I didn't direct my answers toward what the MBRC said to do, because I almost felt like the way I would normally study for a test, I tried to use that for this, and it wasn't really working that way, because it wasn't that it didn't work, but it wasn't all that I needed to use in order to understand the concept of what the MBRC wanted and what Kettering was trying to show us. Now, they did show us some shortcuts that were given to us by other students that went to the actual live seminar. We didn't have that. The teacher that we had felt like it was better for us to have the recordings, which I'm thankful for, because I like that better, because some people were saying that even though the MBRC gave them some good tips in the live section, it didn't really help them in some areas because it was real quick, because they had to like go through every single section within a certain amount of time, and it wasn't enough time to ask questions or nothing because they had other seminars that they had to do. So me, if I were you guys, I would definitely purchase the audio if you guys had the live seminar and didn't really feel like you got anything from it. I'm more of a person that likes to replay what I have recorded or replay something that helps me. So the audio to me was a better fit for me, and I'm glad my teacher decided that for us, because you have to be able to understand the concept and be able to keep listening to it until it starts getting embedded into your long term, to where you can use it without forgetting it so much, because you're not looking at it and studying it and doing what you should. So that was something that I really felt like was very beneficial for us to have the audio to replay and all of that. But on top of the audio, on top of studying the book for the same amount of time and length as the audio, I felt like that worked for me. The practice test that we did use to see where we were at kind of helped a little bit too, but I felt better once I grasped the concept of distancing my mind of learning from work and just focused solely on the MBRC way, because their way is totally different from what you have learned in the hospital if you guys are working as interns. Other than that, I think after I took that test, I focused more in those areas. And then when we took our first practice MBRC test, I passed it. I made a 117 on that test, and not a 117. I think I made a 107, which was still good, but it was given to us, and my teacher was like, that was just like a tester, so the actual real thing is going to be a little bit more difficult. Now, I'm not going to lie to y'all, I did not pass the first attempt, and it hurt me, but I did not get too devastated because I knew what I did. I think what really did me was I did not study the way I was supposed to. I was really like overwhelmed. I think with me working and doing so much around the clock, I kind of got a little bit lazy, I want to say, but not like lazy, but I did not put in the work that I normally would put in, and it showed. I did make CRT level, but that wasn't what the goal was. She wanted us to make RRT level, so it didn't even matter that you actually got a certification score. It was just more so of, if you don't make the RRT level, you won't graduate, and you'll have to just come back and take it again, and then you will be able to complete and graduate with the next class. Me, I did not want to graduate with the next class. I wanted to graduate with my class, and with all the hard work that I put in throughout this entire program, I felt like it wasn't fair to me, and I needed to get back in the game and do what I needed to do. And everything that I'm telling you, I did for this exit exam, and I passed. I made like a 99, because she did say that if you made like in the hundreds on the first test, the practice test, then you should make the same. If not, your score go down a little bit, because that test is going to be actually harder than what we got the first time. And she was right about that. And I made a 99. I was able to graduate on time, make it to Penning, and I did show you guys that on the mini vlog that I made for graduation. I didn't really get to do a full-on vlog that like I wanted to, like some YouTubers do, because as you guys know, if y'all been keeping up with me throughout my whole process of being in school, moving and everything, around the same time that my graduation was, I was packing, like literally getting ready to move back home, because my lease was up towards the end of January. And around that time, I was working, because again, I was full-time in school, and I had to pay for U-Haul and everything, and rates went up higher than it did when I moved out there. So it was like I had to work, I had to pay bills, I had to do all of that. So I had to use every bit of time I had to pack, get ready for graduation, find something to wear, all of that stuff at the same time, trying to pack, sell all my furniture at my apartment. And that took more, because I had to post that stuff in like November to get ready to kind of like get it sold and everything by the end of December. So I had a lot of stuff going on with that. But I was just happy and blessed that I was able to come down there, do what I needed to do, and graduate top of my class. And that was something that I really, it didn't shock me that I graduated at the top of my class, but I was just, I don't know how to explain it, but it was just more so of, I knew that my grades were where they were. And it's always, I don't know about y'all, but it's always two students that's neck and neck with, GPAs and stuff like that. Because it was one other student, we were both like neck and neck. But the only thing that I had more than the other student was I was making straight A's through my entire, every semester. I made 1B, which was in mechanical ventilation, and I was like 2 points away from an A. But that was because mechanical ventilation was hard. And understanding the modes, how to make changes, what they did and everything was hard. That's why when somebody asked me to make a video on how to understand vent modes, I didn't have an issue doing that, because I understood how hard it is. And from what type of feedback I got from that video, a lot of people said that it did help them, and they were able to understand, at least grasp what the mode was, how to use it, and then they were able to better understand the text when they described it and kind of went into more of a visual when it came to scenarios involving vent mode settings, all of that. Because if you don't understand the ABG, you'll never understand how to make changes on the vent, if you can make changes on the vent from their gas. But once I did that, I passed that, and then it's more frustrating because you know that even though you're passing the exit exam, you graduate and stuff, you still got to move forward with studying for the actual TMC, which I had. So that was definitely, you know, the frustrating part, because even though we've gotten like the studying, the graduation, all of that stuff out the way, we still had to study for the actual TMC. So I was just like, it just felt like it wasn't ending, like it just kept going on and on. So we graduated on the 8th of December, so by the 22nd, I had scheduled my test, the 22nd. I pretty much felt like I was doing pretty good because, again, we took the test in school, so I pretty much was already studying the book and doing what I had to do. So using the technique that I showed you guys, the method that I used to study for my TMC, it helped me. Now, I will say that there were, I don't know if I had this in my study video, I think I did, but I go on YouTube and there are some links to some medical channels that I listed in a study with me vlog that I will link below. It helped me 1000% on visuals when it comes to studying the diseases, because even though you're not going to get too in depth with the diseases in the studying of the TMC, because they're asking direct questions, but you have to at least know you really have to know everything, diseases, all of that. But for me, I didn't really go hard into the diseases or the pharmacology part, because most of the questions I've noticed with the pattern that the MBRC had, they were mostly asking about general medications that COPD, asthma, and people like that take, as far as like steroids, Symbicort, Pulmicort, Advair, Dual Neb, Albuterol, all of those drugs were like in rotation. So at least I felt like if I knew just those and what the regimen was for people who take them drugs outpatient and inpatient, I felt comfortable enough to take my test without going too hard in depth into the pharmacology part. And plus, we went through pharmacology, so most of those drugs were listed in the pharmacology book in here, and some of the materials that I went through to try to get through majority of my stuff. So that worked for me. I'm not going to say it's gonna technically work for you guys, but I would definitely do what works for you guys and not what worked for me. But as far as the studying part, as far as listening to the audio constantly, studying the actual text, I would recommend you guys do that, because if you are the type that are not book savvy, where you struggle with that, I would definitely do it, because I used to be like that. I used to love to read, and I had to learn to get that love back, because when I first started college years ago, when I was like 19 or 20, I used to love to read, exercise, do a whole bunch of other stuff that young college students do. But as I got older, started working, and life hit me in different type of areas where it became challenging, those things kind of get to the wayside. So as I got back in respiratory school and started studying and getting all the things that I needed to get out of it, that love and that passion for reading and actually getting the knowledge that I wanted and being very interested in the material got me pumping to start learning more. And with me being in the medical field, I love it. So reading is definitely something that you have to build a tolerance for, because a lot of people don't like to read because of how long the text is and seeing all the words on there. Me, I'm a picture girl. I can deal with words like this, like wording like this, or stuff like this, but homegirl, I be needing some pictures. I be needing some pictures, add some color to it, even if it's just a splash. I need some pictures in here somewhere, because don't nobody want to read just straight words for hours and hours. I need pictures. Even if, like how he got this little chart right here, this is considered a picture to me, and it makes me say, ooh, you know. and stuff like this. You got pictures, demonstrations of what they're talking about, how to listen, all of that. And then, you know, just write notes on the side. Like, when I tell y'all, this book is so marked up from just me taking notes, highlighting, and just making sure that I understand the terminology in here. It's you could tell somebody been studying this book. And that's why I said that don't look at it as it's a lot of material, it's this, that, and the third. You just have to study in order to understand. Now, rhythms, heart rhythms, you gotta that kind of comes and goes with how you feel like it sits with you to kind of learn what they're asking. But what helped me on the rhythm part was, of course, you're gonna do the math and count the boxes to see what the beats per minute is. Once you kind of get the number, to me, it helped me understand what it was. And then sometimes with normal sinus rhythm, you're gonna have like between 60 to 100. Lord have mercy. Hold on. You're gonna have a heart rate between 60 to 100. So it's like you're gonna know what you feel comfortable with, how you can detect if it's tachycardia, bradycardia, flutter, AFib, atrial flutter, all of that stuff like that. So it's like you're gonna count it and you're gonna know, because if that rhythm looks funky, you're gonna know like, okay, this is what they said about it in Kettering. With atrial flutter, you got the sawtooth rhythm that's very, very distinct, so you would never be able to miss that. But you have to be very understanding of how to identify it, because they will have some pictures that will look crazy, different from what you see in your book, and you're going to be like, oh, this looks like this, but it's really atrial flutter. And then atrial flutter has tachycardia numbers as far as like greater than 200 beats per minute. So you're definitely going to notice something is off if you count it and you see that it's 200 or higher, and then you see that sawtooth in there. You're basically going to be like, okay, this is automatically atrial flutter. And then also, just by going through the different rhythms, you're going to understand, you know, what you're looking at, all of that stuff. And see, like with atrial flutter, clearly you can see that it has those sawtooths, but it's different from a picture that we had in my book before. But you can clearly see that that's the difference between the atrial flutter, and then you have AFib right there. So you'll be able to tell the difference without getting too confused. But I would definitely take the time to go through these rhythms and really know what you're talking about, because it's very important. Because I think I had at least 2 or 3 heart rhythm strips on my actual TMC test, and I think I also had 2 or 3 on my SIMS too. So that's important to know that as well, and how to detect if it's a shockable rhythm or not. You need to know that, because I did see that. A lot of the calculations, I did not have calculations. I think the most calculations I had was maybe for the size of the tank as far as how long it would last. And then, what else did I have? The tank. And then as far as, I think that's all I had was how long the tank would last is what I had. I didn't have anything like the hard calculations that we had in school that were like really, really long. I didn't have any of those. I didn't have to calculate any of that stuff. So that was a good thing. I was happy about that. And I love math, but I just, with the time that we had to do, you can't afford to get anything wrong. So it's like you would have to do so much. And one question could take like maybe 3 different equations to solve. And that was like pissing me off when we had to do that stuff on our exams in school. So I was thankful not to see any of that. But I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. Everything in patient assessment I saw on my exam. So I would definitely make sure that I did what I needed to do. I will say that in section 1, section A, if you guys are on doing Kettering on A39, where it has the picture of that heart. If you guys have not written down the normal value for ejection fraction, we were told that the normal range for that is between 60% and 80%. So I would make a note of that around that so you would know. And then for stroke volume, we were told that that range was from 60 to 130. So that's something that I would definitely write down if you guys are using Kettering. And also, I don't know if it says this in any study material that y'all have, but I also made a note on here. So my camera had cut, but for the stroke volume, I said that the range that we were given were between 60 and 130 mLs. And then the note that I wrote under that was stroke volume and heart rate are determinants of cardiac output. So that falls in the category of ejection fraction too, because that just pretty much measures as far as how much blood is actually pumping to the body. And you're always going to have a situation where a patient they may not give you a number on a question, but they might say to you like, hey, this person's ejection fraction is low or their ejection fraction is high. What would you think the patient is in? And one of the options might be heart failure. So basically, you know that this person is in heart failure, and then they're going to give you maybe a part 2 to that question as far as what would you recommend, what would you suggest to the physician of giving to the patient. And 9 times out of 10, y'all, this is not to be, don't think that this goes for every single question, but for heart failure patients that I have gotten on the MBRC, they've always been COPD. COPD patients have been having heart failure on my exam. And I literally have people who are in the hospital that I see about and that I actually take care of that have COPD, and they are in heart failure. And a lot of times with patients who are in heart failure, they have COPD. Because I know in one of these pages, they talk about how a lot of COPD patients have congestive heart failure. They have liver failure. What does it say? Liver failure. They have, they're always hypoxic. They're always requiring oxygen depending on the stage that they're in. And there's always some type of difference in between what you would normally see as a regular COPD patient. Because one thing I want you guys to keep in your minds too is that COPD, asthma are the 2 main diseases I have seen on my clinical sims and on my TMC, because there's like 2 different versions of TMC. If you fail the first one, you get the second one, and then I think if you take it a 3rd time, you'll get the original test that you took the first time. But they don't never tell you what you got wrong. They don't never tell you which area you need to focus in like they would when you did like the practice test at school. And I never understood why is that, and that makes it even harder for you to understand what to study. So that's why I was like kind of glad that my teacher went ahead and ordered this test for us to take the first and the second time, the practice one, and then the actual test that counted towards our exit exam, because it kind of gave you a breakdown of what they're going to ask you, what you need to expect. And it's not so much as question to question, but category. So it's very important. Like when you see these little grade boxes, these are the categories that they're going to have listed under each section. Like if it says patient assessment, they're going to have physical examination of the patient. If you scored a 7 out of 10, 1 out of 2, they're going to have different scores for different areas of this book. And you're going to have to be able to identify every single thing because every point counts. And once I did that, I was able to score much, much higher once I went by that printout and kind of amplified my my learning of what to do and everything. And then another thing too, when I did pass my TMC, there are Facebook groups that are in the same boat as you as far as wanting to learn how to study for the TMC, people who are repeating it, people who are getting ready to take it, all types of stuff. So don't be afraid to grab those, to join those groups. One of them I think that I joined was Jana's group. I think a lot of you guys might be familiar with her, but Jana is a respiratory therapist and she's been in the game for a very long time. I used her and waited until they started bringing out like the sessions and stuff, and there were other people who were administrators of Jana's that had their own groups too, study groups. So I joined both Jana's group and the other lady's group. I forgot her name, but I will try to link their names below to their Facebook pages to where you can look up their groups. Of course, you got to request to join the group and everything, and they will add you on there. They gave us a lot of study material, a lot of access to materials that we are not able to get. And the reason why I'm, mentioning them is because, let me tell you, purchasing this stuff is not cheap. Purchasing online stuff ain't cheap, because I'm gonna tell you right now, when I was studying for the TMC and these Sims, I purchased a lot of tokens on Kettering. I purchased a lot of outside resources like RT tutorials, all types of stuff. I can't even remember what the names of the other sites were, because I had joined almost everything I could join, paying for memberships, trying it for the first month to see if I liked it, and canceling a lot of it because it didn't help. So trust me, I spent a lot of money. So I really felt like if I'm doing all of this, I've got to put in the work I need to pass this test on the first try, because I had to go home. Like, I was getting ready to move to go home. So it was like, I had no time to waste, playing around, wasting money like that. So I will link to their pages when I get a chance, because I haven't been on Facebook in a while. I'm only active on Instagram, but I'm somewhat fairly active on Instagram since I got busier, since I've been home. So I try to post as much updates as I can, but if I don't post on there, I try to post updates on my YouTube community part of my page, so you guys can be up to date and knowing what's going on, and that I'm continue to post or whatever. This video was supposed to been up, but again, I had a whole lot of other stuff that suddenly came up, which I will explain to you guys in towards the end of this part one, or the beginning of the second part of this video, because I know this video is probably going to run a good solid 30 minutes to an hour probably. But I will link their links to their pages under this video when I get done. I joined the group, like I said, listened to the audio, bought tokens, studied the book, wrote down notes, and I also studied with some people from my class. I maybe studied with one person, and that was during the time when I was studying for my exit exam. For the actual exam, I did not study with anybody, because I felt like I had enough tools mentally to study by myself without having to waste my time with that. Don't get me wrong, I do like to study with other people. I'm not a loner, but if you are the type that know you go hard and you know how hard you go with studying, and you got other people that don't go as hard as you, it's better if you go ahead and just study by yourself. Some people do better by themselves, some people do better in group. I'm more of a loner when it comes to wanting to study, but I don't have problems studying with people if it's going to be beneficial to me. But also, you have to also look at it too. If you feel like how they're studying does not work for you, and they're not really up to speed on how you're studying, like I may be in section E already, and I done went ham on these sections beforehand, so I feel like I'm comfortable. I don't need to go back right now. I need to go ahead and continue from section E on down. And the person you're studying with might be on section B. Okay. If I study section B with my partner, that puts me behind, because I wrote out a schedule, I put times, I'm on a schedule that works for me. So me studying section B versus going where I need to be in section E, it puts me behind, and then that wastes more time that I could use to stick to my schedule and where I'm at. I don't mind if a person asks me questions like, what did you do for this section? I would simply help you. But as far as me going behind and studying a section that I've already been in for hours and hours at hand, I'm not doing it. So that's why I like to study by myself, because it helps and it works, and I don't never have like any issue with studying by myself. And to say that I do study by myself, it obviously it works because I was able to make straight A's throughout my program, pass my exit exam, graduate on time, and pass my board exams on the first try with the work that I put in. So I can't say that working with a group helped me, but doing what I had to do and going hard and my study strategies worked way better for me anyway to take my test. So yes, I would definitely, use what works for you, and don't feel bad if you feel like you have to cut some folks off, because I have had to do that, and I've had to literally lock myself away to focus on this test. And when I first sat down in front of that computer to take my test, I was nervous as hell. I was really nervous. I could have actually dookied on myself, all type of things. I felt like my bowels and everything were just not functioning that day once I sat in front of that computer. And I was just sitting there. I said a prayer before I went in there. I said a prayer in front of the computer, and I said a prayer to myself. The biggest prayer that I said to myself is praying that God keeps my mind focused and clear, so that way when I'm reading these questions, I don't have to worry about my mind drifting off, because I'm focusing on what I need to focus on and actually answering the question the way it's asked. So that's one thing that is nothing wrong with that. I pray for a clear mind, because I studied my ass off. And I felt like I developed all the tools that was provided to me through my studying to sit in front of this computer and take this test. And whatever I don't know, I just don't know, but I know enough. That is what I use to embed in my mind, because you never want to go and sit down and just basically question everything that you did. You don't want to do that. You work too hard for it. And that's why I always try to tell people that if I was to sit here and tell y'all every single thing that I went through while I was attending my program, during the whole entire process, y'all would look at me like, how did you do it? But strength is key, prayer is key. And doubting yourself when stuff gets hard is not going to help you. So that's why I always tell people, you have to do what you have to do and put the work in, because if you don't, you're going to regret not putting in as much work as you can and showing people your accomplishment. I went down there and did what I needed to do and came back on top way higher than I thought I was going to, and I couldn't be more proud of myself. So I would definitely make sure that you guys do what y'all have to do. And I know everybody's on a budget, but I was on a budget too, and you just have to do what you have to do. If you gotta pay money to get practice tests to make sure you get better and better after you've studied differently, you do that, because that's what I've had to do. When I didn't do well in the first couple of tests, I studied my ass off for a week, and then once I did that, I retook a different test but in the same category, and I passed it, and I kept going. So anytime I didn't do well, I always made sure that I went back and focused on that area, but also continued to study the areas I was good in, because that way I stayed refreshed on that and didn't lose what I had already embedded up here, trying to focus solely on those certain areas. Also, I wanted to mention to y'all, I did mention earlier about this workbook. I did not really use this workbook. The only time I used this workbook was when we had to do it for homework. But other than that, I did not use this workbook to study. Some people say it helped them, but I don't use this because I feel like the test isn't a fill in the blank. So to me, this kind of makes my mind go in a different direction versus multiple choice. And if you guys know, you know. And I know it's some that's watching this video that understand. If you taking a multiple choice test, doing fill-ins is not going, your mind is going to scramble. And I don't know if that's just something that I just have a OCD about, but baby, multiple choice and fill in the blanks don't go together. if I'm gonna study something or practice, this has to be multiple choice and just matched up just like the test. So I didn't use my workbook to study. I didn't use that. Only when we had to do the assignments for a grade. But let me see what else. I don't think there was really much else that I used for the TMC, because like I said, we had a lot of information that was provided for us in this book by itself. The audio from the Kettering site and the practice test that I bought tokens for. And then you had a practice test. I think there's an A and a B practice full length exam on the Kettering 2 that I took. So it does help that too. So if you've studied for a good little minute and you want to take the practice test first, do that and see how you do. And then if you feel like you've done okay, but you could have done better, study again for like a month or however long you feel. If it's a while before you take the test, then you take the second one. Because I'm gonna tell y'all, Kettering is way harder than the NBRC. The NBRC is still hard, but Kettering is harder. So I feel like if you can pass both the TMC exams on here and the clinical sims, you are gonna go into that testing site and you're gonna blow through those 2 exams, because I blew through my sims when I took this test on Kettering. That stuff was hard. So when I saw that I passed it on the Kettering site for my clinical sims, I knew I was ready. So when I went in there and took my test, I used all my time, but I passed that test. And I made like a 259, and I think I needed to make like a 240. So I passed my test on the first try after I passed that Kettering clinical sims exam. And I felt like I had failed it, but when I saw I passed it, I said, let me go in here and take this test so I can get this over with. Because when you take your first test, yeah, you got CRT, but you know you still have to take that second part, and it's almost like you're stuck in school still. You haven't fully graduated because you have to take that last exam. So when I took my last exam in April and passed it, my mind was officially done, and that umbilical cord was finally cut from my program and my school, and I was able to finally say, I'm done. So ever since then, I've been feeling pretty free to exercise my my scope of practice of being a respiratory therapist, being able to be more confident with speaking with the doctors, nurse practitioners, everything. I was talking to them before, but as you start to be more confident in your practice, you're gonna be able to go against some of the stuff that you know is wrong, but you have to stand on it. You have to stand on it and have evidence as to why you're standing on it. Some doctors don't want to budge, but that's when you notate. That's when you make notes, so that way if anything goes wrong with someone else under their care, you did what you needed to do as a practitioner, and you stood on what you knew could have been used to fix the problem, but the physician disagreed. So that's something that we also will talk about when I do the part 2 for the clinical sims, because that is where you're going to have issues where the doctor is going to disagree, but you're not technically wrong. So that'll be a whole nother separate video, because this one kind of went a little lengthy, but that's all I used for TMC. I felt like it was enough for me. I used this book, I listened to the audio several times a day, and I wrote the notes and combined it with this book, and then I would just study that for straight 2.5 hours or however long the audio was. I do it twice, and then I would give myself breaks in between. And then on YouTube, just for the disease processes, I will go to those linked channels that I'm going to put below, and I would listen to those audios too, but I will also watch the video over and over again, just by seeing how they have the animation done. They'll have the patient on there actually doing what the symptoms and signs are like. They would actually show you what recommendations you would use, how long it would take, how many times a day for the frequency, and just basically showing you the effects of when you have an exacerbated patient and when they get better, and what happens to their lungs when they exacerbate. So that is the reason why I'm going to link everything below, and I have used visuals to help me study, because when I study, I see the pictures, the video that I watched, I see when I study, and it makes things so much better. So that is what I used. I purchased tokens on Kettering, I went through the questions. If it correlated with any of the questions that I had in the sections I've had in here, I would write those questions down, or I would just write down the situation and what they said to you